Chapter 4. The Prince Penguin. Everyone was thoroughly disappointed and saddened by the sight of the passageway lying before them. Although, as Morgana pointed out, nobody had any reason to expect this was the end of the labyrinth. After Sam had grown tired of kicking the metal doors, everyone walked through them, except for Morgana, who sat on the armchair atop the flat platform above Herbert's head. She didn't offer Sam or Stella a ride, so they walked. The corridor was very different to the ones they had come from. The walls were no longer made of cold grey stone, but instead white stone, which was beautifully finished and polished. Herbert had struck one of the stones with one of his picks, and had barely made a chip in it. The passageway was also bigger than the previous ones, and was illuminated not by a mysterious bluish light, but instead by burning torches hanging on metal stands. Sam thought at first there would be no more puzzles or mazes in this part of the labyrinth, but they soon came to a chamber with 3 passageways leading in different directions that had no signposts or plaques on them, nothing to tell them where they led. "Great," said Sam, "more maze work, and we won't even be able to scratch names or directions on these walls." He wasn't happy at all. He was hungry, and his stomach was letting him know with the rudest and loudest rumbles that a gut could make. "Do you want a hug?" Stella asked kindly. "I want food," Sam growled. "I feel hungry as well," Morgana said. "Why don't you have some more tea?" Stella asked. "I would," said Morgana, "but the water is running low, and tea does not contain the nutrients I need." "I really could do with a pork and cheese sandwich," Sam said, licking his lips without realizing. "Oh, of course," said Stella, suddenly understanding. "I keep forgetting humans need food as well as water. I'm sure we'll find something." "We won't unless we keep moving," said Sam. "Which way do we want to go?" Stella suggested left for no reason, and Sam turned down that way. It didn't matter to him. The 3 passageways looked the same, and no one knew where any of them went. Later, though, Sam would thank Stella heartily for choosing this passageway. The corridor was long and straight. It looked as if it continued for about half a mile, and no other passages connected to it. At the end of it appeared to be a large chamber, filled with bright white light. It took about 15 minutes to walk to the end of the passage, and it was a silent journey, but for one question. "Did you say something, Morgana?" Stella suddenly asked as they neared the chamber. "No," Morgana replied. "Oh," said Stella, a little surprised. "I thought you said something." The chamber was massive, bigger than any of the other rooms they had yet seen in the labyrinth. The walls were enormously tall, and hanging from the ceiling was a large crystal, shining a clinical white light across the room. But the thing that caught everyone's attention was the massive pit in the middle of the chamber. It contained a small pool, a landmass consisting of rocks and sand, and it was populated by some strange black and white birds with the smallest, silliest wings Sam had ever seen. "Aww," Stella cooed, looking over the railing. "They're so cute." There had to be 24 at least, and all of them were wandering around in the pit, making weird chirping sounds, unlike any bird Sam had come across. They were actually making a lot of noise. "They're strange things," Sam said, leaning on the railing. "They are penguins," Morgana said. "Penguins?" Stella asked. "A species of bird from the cold south," Morgana explained. "They eat fish and swim rather than fly." "Weird," said Sam, looking at the birds. Each was about 2 feet tall, and quite fat. An idea popped into his head. "I think our food problem might be solved," he said, looking at Morgana. Stella looked at Sam, her eyes growing larger as if in shock. "What? You can't be serious," she said. "I am," said Sam. "They probably taste like chicken." "I'd guess they taste fishy, actually," Morgana said, "but I'm sure they are nutritious." "But they're cute," Stella protested. "And tasty, no doubt," said Sam, starting to drool. He could already imagine one of the birds roasting on a spit. "I shall ask Herbert to get us one," said Morgana. "Hey!" a loud voice bellowed. Everyone glanced around, trying to find the source of the voice, but no one was there. "I am in the enclosure!" the voice yelled again. Everyone moved towards the railing and looked down into the pit, but all they could see were penguins, chirping and trumpeting noisily. "Where are you?" Sam called. "I'm standing on the topmost rock," the voice yelled above the cacophony. Everyone looked until they saw the reef of rocks next to the pool. Standing on the tallest rock was a penguin. You're a bird? Stella yelled, surprised. Yes, I am a bird, the penguin on the rock cried. Every time it spoke, its beak would open and shut, and it didn't look right at all. It looked really bizarre. Same way you're an ethereal wraith of some kind. Hey, Stella said defensively. I'm not a ethereal wraith? Get me out of this cage, the penguin continued, ignoring her. Liberate me from this torment. These smelly, ignorant, uncouth avian creatures are drowning my spirit in an ocean of despair. I fear I shall embrace death with mirth if I'm not released. Sam was shocked at the penguin's surprising vocabulary. I guess we should get him out, he said to Stella and Morgana. Herbert, see if you can get that penguin on the rock, please, Morgana said, her voice barely audible over the trumpeting penguins. Herbert moved along the length of the pit until the railing was only a couple of feet away from the rock. He reached out several arms towards the penguin, the picks forming a kind of cup shape. The penguin waddled onto Herbert's arms, and he was lifted out of the enclosure and onto the paved floor of the chamber. With a head lifted high, he stepped off Herbert's metal arms and onto the floor. Thank you, he said. I swear those things would have been the death of me. They showed no respect to my rank, and I had to strike a couple to show who was the royal around here. What is your name? Sam asked. And how can you talk? The penguin looked up at him. He was shorter than all of them, and yet he held himself, as if he were the tallest in the company. Well, boy, he said, I am Alfwold of Benedictus, slayer of the great forest bear, crown prince of Highrealm, firstborn of the king of Highrealm, Fredwit of Benedictus. He lifted up his right wing towards Sam. You may kneel and kiss my hat. He stopped mid-sentence. Wing, he snarled, looking at said wing. Sam didn't know what to do. A bird with small, stubby wings was claiming to be the crown prince of his country. A talking bird he could just about accept, but a talking bird claiming to be his future king? The same man who had slain a great forest bear responsible for killing 3 knights in the north of the kingdom? That was something he couldn't buy, so he just stood there staring blankly at the penguin. Are you actually a prince? Stella asked, unconvinced. Of course I'm a prince, Alfwold of Benedictus the penguin screeched. He flapped his wings impatiently. Do you not believe me? You're a penguin, Morgana said simply. Herbert had lowered her to the ground, and she was now approaching the seabird. Yes, because I have been cursed, Alfwold cried indignantly. Unwashed girl, can't you tell? How many times have you seen such unrefined animals speak in the tongues of men? Aren't princes supposed to be nice, though? Stella asked. No, Alfwold said impatiently. They are supposed to be strong and courageous leaders, something I cannot be in this silly, insipid form. Wait, said Sam. I'm from Highrealm. I've not heard anything about the Crown Prince disappearing. If you're the prince, why is no one looking for you? Presumably because the foul, haggard witch who cursed me also replaced me with some imposter. Okay, from the beginning, said Sam. What happened? How did you get here? The penguin took a deep breath. I was riding my horse Percival, outside Caingingham, the royal city, when I came across an enchantingly beautiful maiden. I could have sworn I saw the depths of the ocean in her eyes, the source of the sun's radiance in her hair, and the smile of Venus upon her face. He looked off into the distance, a dreamy look on his penguin face. She offered me wine. Oh, how could I resist such an offer from such a beauteous woman? Once the wine had passed my lips, I fell into a deep slumber. When I awoke, the maiden was gone. A foul hag was looking down upon me, and my body was gone, replaced with this. He gestured to himself. She said this was her vengeance against me for some slight on which she wouldn't elaborate. She then placed me in a wooden box with enchanted symbols, and I was teleported into a strange chamber. A colossus came in, said something about the package arriving, referring to a prince as a package of all the indecencies. I struggled against him, but it was all to no avail. He picked me up and put me in that enclosure, so insanity could ruin me. Alfwold finished the tale with a turn of his head to the pit full of penguins, and looked at everyone, no doubt expecting great amounts of reverence, respect, empathy, and sympathy. None of which came in vast quantities. You could be telling the truth, Sam said factually. It isn't impossible, Morgana added. I believe you, Stella said politely. I guess that shall suffice for now, Alfwold said, lifting his head high in an aloof manner. But you still need to be properly instructed on decorum, and how to address a member of royalty. Now, he said, looking around the area, do you have any clothes? Clothes? Sam said, dumbfounded. Yes, clothes, Alfold snapped. I refuse to walk around this place naked for any longer. You've got feathers, though, Stella said. Feathers are not suited for a prince, Alfold cried, flapping his wings in a frustrated and indignant manner, which was so funny that Sam had to stifle giggles. And what is so funny? Alfold asked, noticing his suppressed laughter. Do you find the nature of this cursed vessel in which I dwell to be humorous? We don't have any clothes, said Morgana factually. Or at least, none we could give you. Sam felt his stomach growl again, and realised this conversation was wasting precious time. Look, he said, we'll see if we can find you some clothes later, but at the moment, none of us have eaten. Except me. I don't need to eat, Stella said, as if her contribution to the conversation was useful, which Sam didn't think it was. So could you help us capture one of those penguins so we can have some food? Sam asked. Alfold looked at him, his expression unreadable, although to be fair, his penguin face wasn't really capable of forming expressions. Why kill the birds? He said. That contraption above our head delivers a load of fish twice per day. Sam looked up and saw what looked like a mining track, suspended in midair above the penguin enclosure. A load was delivered some time ago, Alfold said, so a new cartload should be arriving shortly. It drops the fish into the pit, does it? Yes, Alfold said. Into the pool. All of them dead. Great, said Sam enthusiastically. Everyone, get in the pit. We can catch the fish and cook them. Everybody agreed with Sam's idea, except Alfold, who said he didn't want to go back into the enclosure after so recently escaping it. Sam got into the enclosure by jumping over the railing and onto the large rock Alfold had been standing on. Stella slowly floated down into the pit, and Morgana used Herbert for assistance to get onto the ground. Soon, all three of them were standing next to the pool, leaving Alfold and Herbert to watch them from the railing. Okay, here's the plan, said Sam. Stella and I will grab the fish when they fall into the pool. Morgana, you stand there with your bag ready. We will dump as many fish as we can into it. Got ya, Stella said. Morgana just nodded. There was the sound of metallic clanking above them. The cart is coming, Sam shouted. Get into the pool. He dived into the water. It was quite cold, but he was able to ignore the temperature. He saw Stella floating above the water next to him, her arms outstretched. They all looked up and saw a cart appear on the mining track above them. It tipped to the side, and down fell hundreds of small fish. It was at this moment that the penguins, who had been rather quiet up to this point, burst into a loud, excited cacophony of chirping, screeching, and trumpeting. Sam managed to catch a load of fish as they hit the water, and soon his hands were full. When he turned around, he saw all the penguins in the enclosure waddling towards him and the pool. He began to swim back, just as the first penguins dived into the water. Most rushed by him, but he felt some penguins trying to peck the fish out of his hands. Sometimes they missed, and bit his fingers, inflicting pain. He gritted his teeth, tightened his grip on the fish, and raised his arms above his head, kicking with his feet to get to the edge of the pool. This reduced the number of pecks his hands received, but some of the penguins began shooting out of the water, trying to bite the fish and pull them out of his fingers. When he had made it to the bank of the pool, he jumped up and ran towards Morgana, who was standing on a small rock, out of the path of numerous penguins, still waddling and sliding towards the water. She opened her bag and he dropped the fish into it. Help me! Sam looked to the pool and saw Stella hovering above the water and moving towards the land, carrying an arm's load of fish. Her skirt was touching the water, and, to Sam, it looked like she was having difficulty floating above the surface. Hang on, Sam said, stepping into the water. I'm coming! A couple of persistent penguins were jumping out of the water, trying to nab a fish out of Stella's arms. She kept swaying and ducking from them, but this made her balance precarious, and more than once Sam could have sworn she was about to fall over into the water, but she managed to stay upright. Sam ventured as far as he could into the water, while still having his feet on solid ground. As soon as Stella was in reach, he grabbed one of her arms and pulled her towards the dry land. Upon reaching it, she was able to move much better and much faster. Help! Sam turned and saw Morgana was off her rock and surrounded by 5 penguins who were darting around her, pecking at her bag. Obviously aware that fish were in there, Morgana didn't seem to have the energy to keep up with the quick movements of the penguins, and all of her reactions were a second too slow. Soon, all 5 penguins had a hold on the bag and were attempting to pull it out of her hands. Coming! Sam began running towards Morgana, who was wobbling dangerously. Then she fell over. A loud rumbling was then heard, which sounded like an earthquake and a foghorn working together to assault the senses. Sam stopped running and looked up to where the sound was coming from. He realised it was coming from Herbert, whose glass and metal head was staring at Morgana lying on the ground. The penguins standing around Morgana's bag, who had been so noisy and chirpy, began screeching in terror and fled towards the water for safety from what they had to assume was a dangerous predator. As the penguins ran away, the noise from Herbert lessened and then stopped abruptly, leaving a ringing sound in everyone's ears. Sam rushed towards Morgana again and grabbed her hand. "Are you all right?" he asked, helping Morgana to her feet. Morgana brushed some dirt off her skirt and legs. "I'm fine," she said. Sam picked up the bag and opened it so Stella could dump her small load of fish into it. The bag was now quite heavy, and Sam had difficulty carrying it up to the top of the rock where Herbert's arms were waiting for them. Morgana was lifted up first, then Sam and Stella after her. Soon they were all standing on the floor next to Alford and Herbert again. Everyone was very excited and happy, to say the least. "We did it!" Stella said. "Dinner time is now!" Sam cried. Then the excitement died abruptly, and everyone looked at the smelly bag Sam was holding. Sam said. "Any suggestions on how exactly we are going to cook this?"